nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips again with us. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Bilal.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
In the previous episode, we had discussed a few questions normally asked by non-Muslims about Islam, and we got the answers from Brother Bilal. We'll continue that, and we were discussing about the role and the rights of women in Islam. Brother Bilal, coming back to the issues of women, it's perceived that it's very easy for a man to give divorce in Islam as compared to a woman who has to go through a long process to get that divorce for herself. How would you justify this situation?
Well, I think a lot of people think that women don't even have the right to divorce in Islam. You know, they think it's only a man's right. But as you mentioned, it is possible for her through the courts to get a divorce. And technically, it should not be a long procedure. It's just sufficient for her to inform a judge, an Islamic judge, that she wants a divorce from her husband. If she has asked him to divorce her, he didn't agree to divorce her, she can ask that judge to institute. He may ask her and advise her, well, you know, why, and so on and so on. You know, and if he sees the reason is a bit, you know, flimsy, okay, then he tries to advise her, it's better for you to hold on, and so on and so on. But if she insists, she wants out, she feels it is harmful to herself, she doesn't want to be in that relationship, then the judge is obliged to follow through with her request. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a long, drawn-out process, right? So this is, though in practice maybe Muslims might make it very difficult for the woman, you know, in common practice today, reality is that it's not really, it shouldn't be. You know, we look at the practice in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was relatively simple, you know.
Just to interrupt you, at least the woman has to go to the courts and this was it. For a man, it's as simple as saying talaq, 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 and he's through.
Well, this is not the case. Again, people think that, yes, the man just says, you're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced 3 times, and it's over. But this is not the case. There are many preliminary steps that have to be there. For one, he cannot just wake up in the morning, you know, and he turns and looks at his wife in the bed and says, well, I'm tired of her, let me get rid of her. So talaq, talaq, as you said, you know, you're divorced, you're divorced. Not like that, no. He first has to make sure she's not in a period of menses. If she's in her menses, he cannot pronounce divorce. Because we know menses is a period in which it affects the psychology of the woman. It's a biological change in her body, but it affects many women psychologically. Makes them more, as we say, crabby, you know, any little thing, they fly off the handle, this kind of thing. So that could be the reason and the factor which has led the man to want to divorce her. So Islam wants to rule that out. So it says, no, if she's on her menses, don't. Furthermore, he cannot pronounce a divorce in a period between menses in which he has already had sexual relations with her. So Islam says basically, if you still have that much feeling for her that you would have sexual relations with her, then you're not ready to divorce her. Let a period pass, you have no relations with her, and then you can pronounce divorce. So see, it's not just he wakes up in the morning, the idea comes to his head, he's just doing something. No, there are rules that regulate it. And furthermore, even if he pronounces divorce and he was just so angry he didn't even know what he's saying. You know, sometimes this happens. The man pronounces divorce in a fit of anger. The next morning his wife is packing her bags and she's leaving. He's asked her, what are you doing? He says, I'm going. He says, why? Why are you going? She says, well, you divorced me. He said, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. Last night. No, I didn't say that. He was in such a fit of anger, he has said something he's not even realized he said it. In such cases, that divorce is not counted. Thirdly, we can mention that even when he actually pronounces it legally within those guidelines, and it shouldn't be 3 times, he pronounces it 1 time, he has to wait for her to go through another 2 menstrual cycles before her divorce is complete. And she should stay in the home with him as a means to facilitate reconciliation. So that is there to help to give a chance for the marriage to come back together, and so it doesn't fall apart completely. So the actual process of divorce, even when it's actually pronounced, it takes at least 3 months, or close to 3 months, depending, 3 menstrual cycles total, right? So it is not as easy as it is portrayed in the movies or you read in the newspaper, etc. I mean, there are rules and regulations governing it. Now the question, of course, for the feminist would still say, but still, why are you going to put it in the hand of the man? Why not put it in the hand of the woman also? Huh? And according to Islamic law, if a woman, when she's getting married, she asks for it in her contract, the right to pronounce divorce, and the man agrees, then she has it also. But still the feminists would say, well, why do she have to put it in her contract? Why doesn't she just have it automatically? Well, because of the difference again in natures. But the woman having PMS, prior to her menstrual cycle, she's being affected, she's upset, any little thing sets her off, then she'd be calling divorce every minute. The man is more calculated. He's stopping and thinking, what is the consequence, the kids, and the expenses and all this. So he's not going to just, he tends to be more calculating. Woman tends to be more emotional. And that's how God has created them. So the decision on divorce is given automatically to the man who's the head of the family. He is the one who made the proposal for marriage. He's the one who had to give the mahar, to give the wealth, to indicate his preparedness to maintain this family. So that authority is given to him. I mean, she's come in easy, basically. She's gotten the mahar, she's received the mahar. Right? So when he's divorcing, he's giving the woman up. He's giving her the mahar and he's letting her go. So he's going to stop and think what is going to happen in terms of his children. So he tends to be more calculating. So this is, because of this, precedence is given to the man in terms of authority. He's the head of the family also, that it's put in his hand automatically, whereas for the woman it requires some procedures to have that right.
Moving on to some other important issues and questions which come up normally, is that Islam is a very rigid religion. You have rules, so many rules. You have to pray 5 times a day, you have to fast in the month of Ramadan, give zakat. It puts so many clauses for you to be a Muslim. On top of that, any small problem and you have to face your hands being chopped off, your head being chopped off, and so on and so forth. So why is Islam so strict with its followers?
Well, in terms of the legal system, its harshness, we can see apparent harshness, we have to understand that it is geared towards deterrence, discouraging people from crimes. In the case of adultery, for example, stoning to death, something very harsh, this is because Islam values the family. That anything which would threaten the status and the cohesion of the family, it will try to stamp it out very strongly. Because the family represents the basic building block of the society. If you destroy that family, as has happened to a large degree in the West, where the whole family structure now is threatened. They talk about single-parent families. You can even have 2 males making up a family, or 2 females making up a family, having the homosexual families, these kind of things. I mean, so the whole idea of what family represents and everything has become so distorted. That's adultery, fornication, these things are now okay, it's norms now. So the family structure is greatly threatened, it's falling apart. Islam, in order to protect the overall health of the society, is very strong in its dealing with things which would threaten the overall, the basic structure of the family. So those type of laws is to try to ensure its protection. Laws like cutting off the hand of the thief, this is basically as deterrence, to discourage people. And it's for a thief who is a professional thief, not a person who, temptation at a moment, a person who is hungry, he steals, or a person whose boss is not paying him his wages, so he steals something from the boss. No, these people, their hands are not cut. It's for the pickpocket. Pickpocket, he's a professional thief. He has to train to do this. It is for the bank robber. I mean, he has to plot and plan, and the one who breaks into your homes. And these are the people who lose a hand. And the point is that knowing that you may lose your hand is a discouragement. It discourages people from wanting to do this. If the consequence is only that you go to jail, and in jail you will meet bigger thieves, who you can train under, which is what happens now in most of the jails around the world. People don't go in and get rehabilitated. They go in to a training grounds, you see. So you learn from your mistakes, you learn from the senior thieves, and when you come out now, you're going to be a serious thief. You went in an amateur, now you're coming out a professional. So Islam says, no, we don't need to be making huge jails, paying hotel services for individuals who are harming our society. No, we need to take this man's hand off and he will think twice about stealing again. And others, knowing that he has lost his hand, will think twice about stealing in the society. So all we have to see is in countries like Sudan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, where they've implemented the Islamic law for cutting the hands, that once it was implemented, how the crime rate dropped. In the Sudan, well known back in the 80s when they first introduced Sharia, and they let people out of jail first who were convicted under non-Islamic laws. They let them out. And then they informed the society that they were now going to apply Sharia laws, means cutting the hand of the thief and so on and so forth. Within 6 months, the crime rate had dropped over 40%. So that speaks for itself. It is a deterrent. And still, you go to Sudan, you don't see that many people walking around without a hand. I mean, you rarely see that. So it's the rare case, because even in the case of adultery, for example, it requires 4 just and honest witnesses in the society. What is the likelihood of this happening, that they're going to observe somebody in the sexual act? It's very, very unlikely. So it's really the threat of the punishment more so than the actual punishment.
We move on to the question of the whole idea of Muslims given the permission to kill the kafir. First, there is this objection raised time and again that why do you call every non-Muslim a kafir and abuse them? And on top of that, the Quran allows Muslims to kill the kafir wherever you find them. I mean, a lot of authors have been writing on this concept and so on. So how do you respond to that?
Well, one, kafir just means a person who does not believe, a person who has covered up the truth. It's not necessarily an abusive term. If people use it in that way, then it's incorrect. To call a person a disbeliever, it carries as much abuse, quote-unquote abuse, as saying kafir. So it is only a means of dividing the world with regards to faith. You have believers and you have disbelievers. The other point with regards to killing them wherever you find them, these verses are taken out of context. When you go and look at the various verses that speak and address this idea of killing non-believers, usually you'll find in the beginning it speaks about those who have driven you from your homes and taken your wealth and killed your people and this kind of thing. You're now given permission to fight them. And you may kill them wherever you find them, because now it's a matter of self-defense. Well, it's not inviting the Muslim nation to go hunting down disbelievers and killing them wherever they are. Because were that the case, how would so many communities of non-Muslims live under Muslim rule? This was not the practice. So the idea was not anybody anywhere. It was those who were fighting against you, those who had declared war against you, those who were driving you out of your homes, taking your wealth, killing your women and children, etc. You are allowed to fight them. And of course, if you're going to fight, you fight seriously. You're not fighting half-heartedly, but you still, even in fighting, you have laws, you have principles. You're not allowed to go and kill women and children, though the non-Muslim might kill women and children, but they don't have any scruples, they don't have any, rules for war. It's just anything goes. For Muslim, it's not anything goes, So even those kind of incidents we hear about on the television or so, where you find some, women, non-combatants are being killed, by people with Muslim names, or perhaps even by Muslims. These are errors, these are mistakes, these are wrong on their part. Islam doesn't sanction what is being done. So the main point is that each and every one of those verses that people quote, you put them back in the context, you will see what they actually mean. And if we look at the scriptures, whether Christian or Hindu, etc., there are how many examples of fighting and this one killing that one? And I'm sure if you take those, take texts and lines out of context, you can create, of course, a very horrible picture, about Hindu scriptures and Christian scriptures.
When you speak in terms of fighting, one thing that comes out very clearly these days is that suicide bombing has become a very common trend. Every other day you find that there is some Muslim going and blowing himself up, and in turn a lot of innocent people are killed. How does Islam justify this?
Well, in fact, Islam doesn't justify it. I mean, this was a practice among non-Muslims, well known in the time of World War II, the kamikazes. The kamikaze pilots, these were Japanese pilots who flew their airplanes into American warships. This is where suicide bombing started, on a well-known international scale. From there, it went to Vietnam. In Vietnam, yes, Vietnamese used to strap bombs around themselves and run in the midst of Americans and just blow themselves up along with the Americans. This was their practice. This is really not known in Islamic history, in the annals of Islamic history. What was known was suicide missions, where a person may go on what they call a suicide mission, meaning the chances of your return very small. So you go on that because it was necessary to facilitate, either protection of the Muslim armies or facilitate a victory or something like that. So people are sent in, on what they call, quote unquote, suicide missions. But now this kind of a practice where people just wake up in the morning and feel, I need to go kill some kafirs today, let me go strap some bombs around myself and blow a few of them up, out of just hatred and anger and these kind of things. Of course, this is not from Islam at all. Islam does not promote this nor support it,
Dr. Bilal, one question that is often asked by non-Muslims is that why do you always keep talking about the oneness of God and worshipping one God and so on, when you yourselves worship an idol in the form of the Kaaba? How do you respond to that?
Well, first and foremost, I would clarify for them that, of course, the Kaaba, which is in Mecca, the black cubical object which Muslims, in whose direction Muslims pray, that it is not in itself an object of worship. I know that those who worship idols may say, well, that's the same thing with us. We're not actually worshiping the idol, right? We're worshiping God who is concentrated in the idol at the time of our worship. But for us, we're not worshiping God who's concentrated in the Kaaba at the time of our worship. If the Kaaba wasn't there, and there were times when it was broken down, and the Prophet also informed us that there would come a time in the future when it will be broken down again, Muslims' worship will not cease, will not stop. We don't have to have an object of the Kaaba in our homes and to pray to, so it is not an object of worship. Furthermore, twice a year, the door of the Kaaba is opened and it's cleaned, and whoever is present at the time there can go inside and pray. So were it an idol, the idea of going and praying inside of your idol is something, of course, ludicrous. So it is not an object of worship, but only a direction of worship. And it is a house of worship in and of itself. People pray inside of it, at different points in the year. So this is not the case. Of course, there's another point concerning the Kaaba that I would like to mention, which I found quite interesting. Once when I was traveling to UK, a young man was sitting beside me who was Hindu, and we were having a discussion, and open discussion. He was asking about myself, etc., etc. Then he asked me, he said, can I ask you a question? There's something that's been bothering me. Do you mind if I ask you a question, about Islam? I said, no problem. I said, I mean, you won't get upset, right? Because you're from Canada originally, right? So you can understand, right? I said, yeah, no problem. So yeah, I really wanted to ask this question from the time I was quite young, but I have many Muslim friends in UK, but he said, I'm shy to ask them. I feel they will probably get very upset. So no problem. I said, go ahead, ask your question. He said, well, my mom, the whole time I was growing up, she told me that Muslims have inside of the Kaaba Shiva Lingam. So I said, I just started laughing. When he said that, he laughed with me also. He says, what's so funny, really? So I said, well, because, of course, it's not true at all, right? And I can imagine it would have been something maybe offensive to Muslims, traditional Muslims, if you told them that, right? But I said for myself, of course, there's no problem. No, this is not the case at all. In fact, as I mentioned, we do open up the Kaaba twice a year. They go in, people pray in it, etc. There are no idols inside of the Kaaba. In the past, yes, idols were set up around it, and people used to come there and worship those idols. But they were all destroyed in the time of the Prophet. May God's peace and blessing be upon him, and none remained. Because idol worship in any shape or form is completely prohibited in Islam. And this takes us to the point that Muslims as a whole need to reflect on the importance of conveying the message of Islam to the non-Muslim world. Because if that message were effectively conveyed, then we wouldn't have questions like this being asked. But unfortunately, we have not taken up the responsibility of conveying the true message of Islam to the world as a whole. We have remained silent. We've only reacted to false information or misinformation that has been sent. From time to time, we react and make a big noise, and but we're not proactive. We're not ahead of the situation, presenting the positive and correct image of Islam, image which calls basically people to worshiping one God, and worshiping that one God alone. This is the basic message of Islam. Worship God alone. Avoid all the worship of false gods, and live a life according to what is pleasing to God. Where God has identified the correct way to live, we should live in accordance with that way. A way which is good for humankind. Whatever Islam calls to is well known among human beings as being something good. Islam is not really calling to something weird and strange. I mean, when it tells people pray 5 times a day, the idea of praying to God 5 times a day on a regular basis is something good. Who can say no? The fasting the month of Ramadan, fasting, learning abstinence, controlling one's desires, etc. This is again something good. Giving zakat, taking 2.5% of your wealth and giving it to the poor. Not to a church or to a temple, etc., but to the poor. The pilgrimage to Mecca to commemorate the sacrifice of Prophet Abraham, his willingness to sacrifice his child. That we all as human beings should be prepared to sacrifice the material things of this world for the pleasure of God. I mean, all of these are ideals. They're good principles which we all recognize. So Islam calls to goodness. It doesn't call to violence and terrorism and these kind of things as it's being portrayed, but it really calls to goodness, righteousness, justice, peace, and all of the good qualities of life that people value. They're all there in Islam, with a personal program for each and every individual to live a righteous life.
Jazakallah, Dr. Bilal Phillips. We'll conclude on that note. Thank you very much for coming down and speaking to us. Jazakallah khair wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Barakallahu feekum.